Welcome to the lesson called the PowerShell ISE. This is part of the Train Signal course, Windows PowerShell 3 Essentials, and I'm your instructor, Jeff Hicks. In this lesson, I want to give you an introduction to the PowerShell ISE, sometimes referred to as graphical PowerShell. The PowerShell ISE lays out nicely now in version 3. That's been modified from what we had in version 2. And now in version 3, we have a nice two-panel layout. The top part is our script pane, and the bottom part is the console or command pane. And there are a lot of really nice bells and whistles and things that I think you'll find very helpful in using the ISE. So as I said, it is a scripting editor. If you will be writing scripts, and we'll cover scripts later in the course, you need to be using at least the ISE, if not a full-blown PowerShell scripting editor. Notepad is really not a good thing to use for developing scripts unless it's a 1 or 2 line thing. You'll want to use the ISE. Because as a scripting editor, it includes things like tab completion, IntelliSense, so I can get a little pop-up help about the commandlet and the parameters. The ISE in version 3 supports snippets, so it makes it very easy to add little blocks of code to your script. Expandable regions, so I can put in special regions in my ISE and I can collapse the code, so if I have really long scripts, it becomes a really nice feature. Color coding, so I can tell what's a comment, when something is a commandlet, when something is not written right, because the IntelliSense will also show me like a little squiggle underline if something is not entered in right or incomplete. So those color coding, those visual cues help me prevent bugs and take care of things as I'm developing the script. Instant F1 help. This is really cool. If you put your cursor anywhere on like a commandlet name in the scripting editor, or even I believe in the management console down on the bottom, and press the F1 key, you'll get help for that commandlet in the show window pop-up. So that's a really handy way so you can get help for a commandlet right from within the ISE. It does include a basic debugger, but I think a lot of people will use it as an interactive management console. Again, this also includes things such as tab completion and IntelliSense. You can open up multiple tabs, which will give you multiple PowerShell sessions, or you can also open up remoting tabs, and I can have multiple remote sessions in a tabbed setting, all within the ISE. So the ISE can kind of become a one-stop shop, if you will, for all of my PowerShell management needs. And the PowerShell ISE also includes an integrated show command window, so that you can use the show command to build a command and either execute it or copy and paste it into your script. Another nice new feature in the ISE version 3 is recently used files. Now in the ISE, it will list the recently opened file. So if you work on a file, close the ISE, go back, you can just go to your recently used and reopen a file. The default is 10, but you can customize that. I'll show you how to do that in a moment when I get to the demonstration. The other nice thing about this, the ISE will automatically save files, and if the ISE crashes or does not shut down properly, the next time you start it, it will use that recently used list and the auto save feature and recover files that were not properly saved. So you don't have to worry too much. I mean, you should still do backups, but it's a nice little sanity check to help you should things really go wrong in your PowerShell session. We can also configure PowerShell ISE, so we can kind of really change the look and feel, make it work for us. You can change font settings and themes. You can change the layout and configuration. So if I want the script panel to be on the top and always on the top maximized, I can configure that. I can configure how frequently, how many minutes I want to set the autosave. I can configure, how many files I want to recently save. Maybe 10 is too many. Maybe all you want is 5, or maybe you want 20. You can customize that. And you can also adjust things like the IntelliSense timeout. I think the default is 3. So instead of me, talking about all these things, let's go into PowerShell. Let me demonstrate the ISE. If you've not seen this, I think you'll find it very interesting. Let me kind of introduce the PowerShell ISE to you. I think the ISE is one of those things that is much easier to see than to talk about. So let's go into PowerShell here and launch the ISE and see what it looks like, and I'll show you some of these configuration settings. Now you can launch the ISE either from your shortcut for PowerShell. This is from Windows 8, so I've got a shortcut pinned here, or I could go to the Start menu and find PowerShell ISE and launch it, so I can run the ISE as administrator, basically make it an elevated prompt, or just the regular PowerShell ISE. Or if you're in PowerShell, just type ISE and it will launch. So here is the PowerShell ISE, and what you have actually are several panes here, and you can adjust the position of all of these and whether you want things full screen or not. So this is the script pane, this here is the command pane, and this is the show window, the show command window. With the script pane, you get things like IntelliSense. So I can start typing the name of a commandlet and PowerShell will automatically find it. So let's say I want to get WMI object. I can hit space, tab after the dash, and now I can see pop-up help. Now this I have to know what the class is. Computer name, I hit tab, it auto completes it. Now I can find type in the computer I want. I can then select to either save this as a script file and run it, or I can select the line and run this, or press F8 and that executes it. Basically paste the command down in the console window and you can see that it ran, and I've got a typo there, so FP01. As long as the cursor is anywhere here in the line, you can just hit F8 and it will run. So there we go. So I can work with this interactively with that IntelliSense, or I can also get that same IntelliSense down here. Get to my object class. So it becomes pretty easy to create a script because the ISE will do a lot of the completions of parameters and commandlet names for you. The show command here works kind of the same way. I can come here and pick a file, pick a commandlet, and then I can add in the parameters that I want and either copy it, which will copy it and I can paste it into my script, or I can insert it, which will insert it over here. In fact, let's do that. Let me pick though a different commandlet. Let's do like get. No, not from the module. Let's do get. Let's find get service here. So let's say I want to find all of the services on Chicago DC01. So I can either run it, so that copied and pasted the command right there, or I can, let's clear the screen there. I can insert it, which sticks it there, or I can copy it, in which case, if I wanted to, I could then paste it there, and then create my script or run it. So having this back and forth is quite handy. If I personally like having things full screen, I typically will then close that. If you want to get that back, just come to View, Show Command Add-on, and that'll turn that back on. If you have this full screen, which I kind of like, and want to go back and forth, use Control R, and that will toggle back and forth between those two tabs. You can also create a new PowerShell, totally new PowerShell session from here. I don't really need that, so let's close that. I can also create new PowerShell tabs. This now is a completely separate set of windows, both the console, like here, and the script panes. You can have as many of these as you want. These are like having multiple PowerShell windows open. They're each individual sessions, totally isolated from each other. You can also create a new remote PowerShell tab. We'll talk about remoting later in the course. But now I can create, and now I have a remote session, in this case on Chicago FP01. So any of the commands that I type on that computer are actually executing on that server. Again, we'll talk about remoting later, but you could have multiple remote tabs open. So if you got a handful of servers to manage, you want to do that remotely, you could just use the ISE and just bop back and forth between each of the remote sessions. So I'm going to go ahead and close those. So there's a look at the using it interactively. In terms of configuring it, I don't have anything here because I haven't saved any files. Here, let's go ahead and let me create a file here. Let's save this. And let's save this under C scripts, get service.ps1. So now I have here and the recently listed file. So as I save and open files, that will be populated for me, so it makes it pretty easy and pretty nice to go back and find a command that I worked on earlier. To configure the ISE, there's some nice new features here in version 3. If you want, you can come here and define the font that you want to use. I recommend sticking to a fixed width font like Consolis or Lucida Console. You can change the font size. Let's say I want to make this 12. You get a little preview here, which is nice. You can change colors. You can change the theme. So let's say I want a light console and a dark editor. So that's what that's going to look like once I apply it. In fact, I'll go ahead and apply it. So you can see how that changed. And I can also come here to general settings, and this is where I can really configure things. Let's say when I want the ISE to start, I always want the script pane to be maximized. I can control the IntelliSense timeout. So let's say my computer's a little slow and I want to give it up to 5 seconds. You can configure the number of recent files to open or to show there. So I'm going to set that to 9. You can change the autosave interval. I'm going to change that to 1 minute. The autosave interval is important because PowerShell will save files in the background, and if for some reason the ISE crashes or doesn't close properly, the next time you start it, it will restore those files. You'll get a message saying the ISE did not properly shut down. Would you like to restore the last used file? So that's a very helpful feature. So I can do OK. So now I have reconfigured the look of that, and you can also, by the way, just use this little zoom tab here if you need to make your fonts larger or smaller. Now some of these settings will persist if I close the ISE and launch it again. So in that case, so that setting changed, and my other settings, right? So still recent files is 9, interval. So some things will change, some won't. Some things you may have to put in your PowerShell profile. The ISE has its own profile script. We'll cover profiles elsewhere in the course as well. And any commands you want to put in to modify this, I'm going to cover this in a moment when we get back to the slide deck, that will come in handy as well. So that is a look kind of at the ISE. You can configure it however you need it to be. It becomes a very handy tool for managing systems, as well as if you've got nothing else to develop scripts, you should be using this and not Notepad. We'll cover scripting towards the latter part of this course. So there's a look at the PowerShell ISE. Let's go back to the slides and look at a few more things that you need to keep in mind. Now, as nice as the ISE is, there are a few gotchas you need to keep in mind. First off, there is only one version of the ISE installed. Even though you can run PowerShell version 2 side by side with PowerShell version 3 from the management console, from the blue screen, if you will, there's only one version of the ISE, the version 3. So if you're in PowerShell version 2 and type ISE, you're going to get the PowerShell version 3 ISE. The ISE is an optional feature on servers. It is not installed by default, but you can certainly go in and turn it on if you'd like. Turning it on may require installing additional features such as .NET Framework 3.5, but when you go through the setup, you'll be prompted for anything extra that you may need to install. But again, that is optional. This will become more important when we get to scripting. Everything in the ISE runs in a single shared scope. Just kind of keep that in the back of your head for right now. If you're just starting this course and working your way start to finish, this probably doesn't mean much to you right now, but this will come important later. The ISE does have some advanced stuff that you can do. Well, maybe not advanced, but here's some other things that you can work with the ISE, and I showed you some of this in the demo. If you want, you can open a script right from the PowerShell prompt in the ISE. Just type ISE and the name of your script or scripts, just do a comma-separated list, and it'll open them up in the ISE. Now, once the ISE is open, you can't rerun that and have it open up in the same ISE. I've yet to find a way to make that happen. The thing you could do, though, is if you have the ISE open, you can drop down to the console prompt and type PS edit, and again, a comma-separated list of the paths to your scripts, and those will all open up in new script tabs in the current ISE. The ISE actually has its own object model. We don't have time to get into that in this course. It's kind of an advanced topic, but this allows you to modify the ISE on the fly. You'll find as you browse through blogs on PowerShell related sites, you'll find examples of how people are modifying the ISE. For example, you could change the font size. So if I always want the font size to be set to 16, instead of configuring it through the GUI, you can have a command like what you see there on the screen, and it will change the font size. Or I can use the ISE to build a function. Let's say I want to insert some text into the current file. So this little snippet you see here is going to insert the getProcess command, that output, and insert it into the current script. Maybe not the most compelling example, but I wanted you to see that there are things that we can do with the ISE even beyond what I briefly showed you in my demonstration. The ISE can use this to be extended on your own. You can add your own add-on menu. There are third-party tools that are being developed, so you can add your own bells and whistles, little scripts, little functions to add more features to the PowerShell ISE. And that's how we do that with this ISE object model. If you want to modify the ISE on your own on the fly, you'll want to use the PowerShell ISE profile script in order to make those configuration changes, like that font size command, for example. You just put that in your PowerShell ISE profile script, and then that would always run whenever you started the ISE. That kind of concludes the concludes the lesson here. You do have a lab on the PowerShell ISE. What I'd like you to do is open the ISE in your test environment, configure the ISE to save the last 7 open files, set the IntelliSense timeout to 5 seconds, modify the color scheme, change the console pane to have a black background, and then after you get those all set, restart the ISE. Is it still black? Do you still have the other settings? Why or why not? So if you need to, go back and look at the demo if you want, because I've showed most of those things if you don't recall how to do that, or just kind of open up the ISE and poke around and see if you can figure it out. The lab answers are part of the downloaded class file, so if you really get stuck, you can just take a look there. That wraps up this lesson. I hope you found it, as always, informative, and I will see you next time.